The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is out with its annual Goalkeepers Report this morning. It measures the progress of key sustainable development goals the UN agreed to achieve by 2030. The report shows roughly 200 member countries are far behind their targets in everything from poverty to world hunger. I spoke to the foundation's CEO, Mark Suzman, along with Julie Hyman, and discussed the stark divide he continues to see, especially on the issue of gender equality. Take a listen.
So tech is absolutely a critical tool to do that globally, and that you can do it at the very poorest level of women across the world, simply getting access to digital bank accounts and financial services, which is now possible really anywhere. We found has a massively beneficial effect in terms of allowing women to get access and build assets, to enter the job market, informal and formal sector, to get access to credit. And having a very deliberate focus on how you target women is critical, because the report also shows there's a gap, a big gender gap globally in financial access, where men have more access to all these financial tools than women do, even as their overall access has been growing. And so these kind of things are the underlying contributory factors to exactly what you're talking about.
And then there's also the idea of that the support for women is also very necessary, both the support from a financial perspective, but also childcare perspective. And the report also talks a little bit about how to attack that issue in sort of maybe more creative ways, right?
Yeah, exactly. So childcare is one of the biggest challenges for women in the workforce. It's one of the reasons why job losses during COVID were disproportionately women. It's not just the economic payment gap that you cited. It's also they're more likely to leave the workforce when you have challenges like COVID because they have more childcare. Often it's because they have more childcare needs and duties. So if you can have a more effective childcare setup, then you're unlocking the ability for these women to enter or re-enter the workforce and generate a much higher economic return. And what you have is opportunities even in one of the examples cited in the report is an example from Kenya about they call them mamapreneurs, but it's basically what you create these childcare collectives in sometimes these are in very poor areas of the cities, which actually create jobs for the child carers and then free up the time for women to then go and get mainstream jobs in the cities. And those are really scalable opportunities, which we're working on right now with partners like the World Bank.
And that was Mark Suzman, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation CEO. I want to bring in Julie Hyman, who, of course, was part of that conversation alongside me. And Julie, in many ways, it's a fascinating report, but also a very depressing one. If you think about where we are in terms of progress for gender equality, Melinda Gates in an interview saying the pandemic has really stalled progress for women and saying that it has set us back 3 generations.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting report because at the same time, Bill and Melinda French Gates tried to sort of strike a little bit more of a hopeful tone in their introduction to the report. They brought up HIV as an example of where there was really this big global will and push to work on a difficult problem. And in that case, there was a lot of success in dealing with that challenge. And they sort of left it a question mark as to whether these other global challenges are going to be met by the moment. It's also interesting how they use technology in many cases so effectively to deal with these issues. In the case of women, to get the mobile payments versus cash payments, which according to their data is sort of more successful in working its way through their system and helping build wealth. But all of that said, there are still a lot of variables here that make it unknown as to whether the success ultimately is going to be there. And, the gap that you cited certainly is a pretty big one to surmount.
Yeah, I mean, that number, that the World Bank has put out, the difference in expected lifetime earnings between men and women is twice the size of the world's annual GDP. And that pretty much says it all. We're talking about $172.3 trillion. But to your point, Julie, about addressing this issue, one of the things the Gates Foundation brings up in this report is that part of it is the framing of the question about how exactly do we tackle this. In many ways, the foundation's saying that the issue the divide hasn't necessarily closed because the world is treating the symptoms, specifically not the cause of the inequality.
Right. And Melinda French Gates tries to reframe it as an issue of women's power versus women's empowerment, sort of the place that they hold in society, and the fact that she believes they should sort of have more control over their own finances, and in some cases over family finances as well, particularly in the developing world. So maybe that reframing will help to some degree. I mean, certainly an organization like the Gates Foundation has the resources. If anybody can try to make some inroads with these issues, one would think they could do it, but it can't be any one organization is sort of the problem here. And it has to be cultural and societal also. So, you know, there's only so much, I guess, that an organization can do.
Yeah, and we should point out this report isn't just about gender equality. Right. Certainly a lot more included in there. We did also talk about food security, especially the impact coming from climate change. So you can catch our full interview on our site, yahoofinance.com. Julie, thanks so much for that.